there's things about it that make sense, and there's concerns about it. I'd say it's one of those ones where I sound like I'm sitting on the fence.
No, it's not at all. A bit like when we're talking about Ericsson and Vonage. You can see some of the rationale, but you're not totally sold.
It's maybe a harder one for me to be a judge on as well, because a lot of it's in areas that I don't really know that much about. I mean, I think from the telecom side of things, which is the bit I do know more about, it certainly makes HPE a bigger force in telecom.
Hello and welcome back to the Telecoms.com podcast after about a month off, isn't it?
You've had a long break, haven't you?
I had a long break. I
just work generally.
3 weeks off. Yeah, well, that's because Andrew does such a great job. In fact, I never do any work. I just get Andrew
You take longer off.
Yeah. Well, I don't take it off officially, but I just do fuck all. Except the podcast.
Yeah.
So that's not bad. It's not a bad hourly rate I'm getting. But no.
Did you do anything nice on your 3 weeks off? Or?
No, we didn't go away or anything like that. Just recharged batteries, chilled, did Christmassy stuff.
You did the what's it called, the turkey crown?
Yeah, turkey crown and all that.
Did you smell like blue cheese this year?
No, it wasn't one of those. Although I did go mad with the sort of cured pork sides. 3 different types of stuffing.
Oof, that's pretty good.
Yeah, there was the stuffing that I put in the turkey, then there's a separate thing of stuffing and then some stuffing balls. And then 2 different types of pigs in blankets, because I'd got the pigs in blankets, which for people who aren't from the UK, is basically small sausages wrapped in a bit of bacon, which you then roast. And it's very, very tasty. And then I went to Sainsbury's and they had fucking like jumbo-sized ones. So I was like, right, I'm having them as well. And everything else, bread sauce, loads of roast tatties, Brussels sprouts, you name it. So yeah, it was a good spread.
I'm pleased to see Ian didn't roast his phone.
He didn't roast his phone?
I didn't do the cooking this year. So
is that why?
Yeah.
Magda's like...
No, I mean, we were
actually
at my parents'. So
okay.
My mum's like, just insists on doing it all. She doesn't really like being helped with it. So.
No, well, I'm really sort of tyrannical in the kitchen.
Yeah, I know what it's like, because when I have done it, you have your idea of how it should all slot together, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You have things under control. And
well, you want everything to
help, but you can't figure.
It takes longer to explain.
It takes longer to explain,
and you want everything to culminate at the same time. So it's a real juggling act.
It is, yeah.
But yeah, I've always done it, and I've pretty much got the hang of it.
Yeah.
The biggest one is potatoes always take longer than you think.
Yeah.
You need to roast them for like 2 hours if you want them properly crispy.
Yeah.
So that was all good, and then I'm on dry January, everyone. This is very weird. In fact, we've got to there's a few bribe of the weeks. First bribe of the week is from Pierre. Mm-hmm. So Pierre, bless him, brought us a couple of pale ales. They're from France, yeah?
They're from a very small town right next to my hometown, yeah.
It's called Opbel.
Chromatique is the...
Well, we can have them next time round.
Yeah, we'll have them next time round. But thank you very much for that, Pierre.
4%, 4.5? Nothing crazy.
Yeah, nothing out of order. And it's got very few ingredients. Mm-hmm. Although I don't know what houblon or...
It's like barley.
That's barley. Houblon, levure.
Yeast.
And then sucre, sugar. Mm-hmm. I know that one.
It's good. It's actually really not sweet at all. It's really good.
Yeah, and it is 4.5%. God, they got all sorts of little metrics on it as well.
Yeah, these guys are serious.
They call alcohol force. I mean, I presume that means strength, yeah?
Yeah.
But it's like force.
Yeah.
The force of this fucking beer. But then they got a little gauge for colour and for hops and all that stuff.
The force isn't with you today, Scott.
Refrescante.
Yeah, refreshing, yeah.
Right, that's just an arbitrary thing they've decided to throw in.
I think you're tormenting me by looking at...
I know, so you were... Ian was thinking, so you haven't drunk since Boxing Day, yeah?
Yeah, I'm not really on dry January, I'm just trying to cut down.
Yeah, you're just trying to...
Well, I did have a couple on New Year's Eve, I sort of interrupted.
Oh, right.
That's why I was thinking of doing it today, because I don't...
You're just generally being moderate. Yeah, I just sort of...
Well, dry January, not...
No, I'm not doing dry January.
No. Well, I'm not... I don't think... I'm already saying now, I'd be very surprised if the pod within a week's time, I don't have a beer. But that will take me to the 19th.
Yeah.
And that's all right. I mean, just 3 weeks of just resetting. It's the habit for me. It's just not like during December, I'll generally have a drink pretty much every day.
Yeah, it's more like
and it's just resetting that habit.
Really.
Yeah.
But I'll definitely be drinking.
You might have lost a bit of weight.
I have lost a bit of weight, but I need to get some more off. But
nice one.
I want to. Yeah, I just felt really crap on Boxing Day, like just culmination of several weeks of drinking, and I just thought I'm not going to have anything now until, and then cut down on eating a lot as well. So
you should do what I do,
running a bit more, but.
It's not rocket science, is it? Eat less, run more.
Yeah, but I'm definitely drinking the following week anyway, because we've got that CC group.
We've got CC group, and now
other things as well. Now, I'm sure.
Babel's found a bar called Babel.
That's right.
In King's Cross.
Isn't that February the 8th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's good for them. So we got at least 2 warm-ups for Mobile World Congress.
I'm sure there's something else going on that week as well. Oh, yeah, Charlie Ashton's over for the podcast.
Yeah.
He specifically said he was bringing beers.
Yeah,
so we can't really sit there and not drink
No,
beers,
if I was going to be really disciplined, I would wait until the CC, which is the day before. So Charlie Ashton's 26th, CC's 25th.
And then my wife's birthday's on the 27th.
Yeah, so if I was going to be really good, but I think like 19 days will do me.
Yeah, you'll be all right.
So there we are. But I'm being good now. I mean, to be fair to me, both Pierre and Ian were going, go and have a beer. And I was like, no, I'm going to be good. So I just want credit for this, for this Herculean self-restraint.
If you were having one, I'd definitely have one.
Yeah. Well, there we are.
So but if you open that now, I'm opening one.
Yeah. And then I brought this as another bribe of the week prompt. So this is Duke's Hill handcrafted cider from whiskey casks, and it's 6.7%. This is one of a few things that are in a very nice hamper that ZTE sent me. So you've definitely
ZTE.
You've definitely got bribe of the week there, ZTE. It had all like charcuterie and cheese and.
I didn't get anything from ZTE.
Shit like that. Well, didn't you get anything at all?
No. I went out with Huawei and got some stuff from them.
Oh,
I didn't get
right.
I didn't get anything.
Oh yeah, I got the chockies off them. You didn't get anything off ZTE. Well,
no.
So if
that's disgraceful.
You can see whether it's actual bribes or not. Whether Ian now writes shitty things about ZTE and I write nothing but accommodating.
I'm gonna have to think carefully about my coverage of ZTE from now on.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. I'll let you have some of this if you want. You can have some my cast-offs from my hamper.
I bet that's kind of.
Well, that's not going to take any prisoners. There were 3 of them in it, and my son's already coveting one of them.
Is it good?
He's on dry January as well. It's sad. He's not even 20 and he's having to do dry January.
Oh, that's just wrong.
He's my son. Well, he's a chip off the old block. He doesn't often get off his face, but he'll have a drink in the evening.
He does work in a pub, doesn't he?
So not anymore.
He's not anymore. Okay.
But I mean, remember what it's like being 19, 20. I don't think any of us were that shy on the booze then.
No.
Certainly, I was at Bristol University getting a massive head start on my beer gut. And then the last bribe of the week, I don't know if this comes over in the camera, is this T-shirt given to me by lovely Amy Elston, who's a friend but also does the PR for Red Hat in the UK. And this is her band that she's in with Sean Jackson, who years ago wrote for Telecoms.com. And I just saw the other day is still doing this sort of thing because I subscribed to some stuff from Mobile World Live and I got an invitation to a webinar that he was hosting for Mobile World Live. That was Sean Jackson. Oh. But anyway, Sean Jackson's the lead guitarist, right, and Amy's the drummer in Rebel Death. Rebel Death.
What kind of genre is that? I wonder.
Metal. Sorry.
Thrash metal.
It's
reggae.
It's lounge room jazz.
Yeah.
So those are all the bribe of the weeks done. I haven't asked you guys about your Christmas. Pierre, did you get out too much? Did you go back to Bologna?
Yeah, I was here for Christmas for the first time in a long time, actually. And then we went on the 27th to my hometown.
Right. Cool.
More drinking and eating.
Yeah.
The weather was.
Is Christmas in France pretty similar to Christmas in the UK? Just lots of nice food and hanging out and drinking.
Dealing with your family. Yeah.
Dealing with your family. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much. What about you?
Yeah.
You didn't go away?
Just to my parents.
You were telling me that in Magda's village in Slovakia, it's minus 27 degrees.
It has been this week. I don't think it was at Christmas, but...
Damn.
Yeah, we don't normally go over there at Christmas.
That's the Central Europe shit, isn't it?
Yeah. So we were in the home counties where my parents live and my sister and her family with all of them. There's about 10 of us, I think, on Christmas Day. And
wow.
Hung around till the 27th and then came back from there and went to a mate's on New Year's and that was it, really. Otherwise, I've just been around the house kind of twiddling my thumbs and...
Yeah. I mean, I quite like just having the time off. The thing about having a proper chunk of time off, like 3 weeks, because I did it last summer as well. So we get about 5 weeks from Informa, and sometimes it's hard to use it all up. I mean, Americans would be like, 5 weeks? What the fuck?
Yeah.
But, you know, that's
just
just
what to do with themselves.
That's just the European way. And sometimes it's hard to use it all up because you'll have your big, you know, you'll have at least a couple of weeks in the summer, but that still is you 3 weeks to use up. And you use up maybe one around Christmas. But it can be sometimes hard to use it all up. Anyway.
I didn't use mine up.
Yeah. And I like having these big chunks because it's like the power of three for me. Like the first week, you're just unwinding.
Yeah.
Second week, you're properly into the groove of being relaxed. And then third week, you're, you know, going back to work's on the horizon.
Yeah.
So it's that middle week's the golden week. Saying goes, I can't remember. I was chatting to someone about weekends. And actually, I think it might have been Phil, your boss, because I was explaining my holiday thing and assuming that him as an American would find that a bizarre concept. And we were both agreeing that maybe Fridays off is good because then you get that 3-day weekend where the middle day you're properly chilled. And to be honest, who's to say that you won't be that much more productive in the other 4 days? Who knows?
Yeah, possibly.
But anyway, so I enjoyed that, and you know, you get to really just, not that I dislike my work, far from it, but you just get to forget about work and just clear your mind. So hurrah! And so here I am with renewed vigor.
Good. I'm not drinking.
And not drinking for now.
So very vigorous.
Yes. Well, quite. I tell you what, actually, that is a good point.
Yeah.
I went for my first run of the year the other day, and it went a lot better than I thought it would be.
That's good.
And I thought, shit, is this because I haven't drunk for a couple of weeks?
Yeah.
Or it had only been about 9 or 10 days by a week and a half. But I thought, is that it?
So what are the odds?
Yeah, I know, but just the lingering effect. I mean, we know about hangovers, but like normally if I'll drink during the week, it won't be that much. It'd be like maybe a beer and a glass of wine over the course of the whole evening. But even that, if you get that completely out of your system, yeah, exactly.
Your liver is like,
Your liver and, yes, your whole body. I mean, I'm going to sound like I'm about to completely give up the booze, but I don't think I'm quite ready to make that jump yet. Yeah. But it is a reminder, and obviously you get better sleep. That's another thing.
Yeah.
And presumably you lose a bit of weight because alcohol's pretty calorific, isn't it? So there's lots of things in favour of it, but then on the other side of the ledger, getting pissed is a fucking great laugh.
Yeah, it's quite boring sometimes, not drinking, isn't it? I find this month actually really quite a horrible month generally. I can't stand January.
Enough. It's so bleak, it's so sad.
It's just it just seems to go on forever. It seems to be about 7 weeks long.
Yeah.
And there's nothing happening in it.
Quite warm.
And you're not drinking and trying to lose weight. It's all a bit miserable.
Fluffy hoodie on, and it's quite warm in here with the door shut.
Yeah.
I have to wear like 4 layers when I'm sitting at my desk at home. And these little fingerless gloves.
You need to turn the heat on in your...
No, it's just... it's on in the morning. I just don't have it on during the day. But we give ourselves a little boost in the morning. And it's kept at the thermostat level of about, I think, 17.6 centigrade, which isn't that hot. But, if you try and keep it at 20, 21 all day, your fucking fuel bill's going to go mental, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've been putting it on more than I should be doing, really, because it's just been feeling really
I just put on layers.
In the house.
I put on layers and drink tea.
It's your fingers and your sort of nose.
You don't get mold in your house.
This is not pleasant.
Your ears. I get cold ears. Yeah. So there we are. It's all good fun.
Yeah.
All right, we better crack on, haven't we?
Yeah. Are we still going? Is that not it?
Yeah. We've decided the Telecoms.com podcast is now just going to be anecdotal bollocks about our daily lives rather than anything telecoms. Well, thankfully there has been some news, which is always handy at the start of the year because the start of the year is normally pretty quiet. That's one of the reasons I took 3 weeks off because I know that first week of the year is normally dead anyway. It
is normally dead on the news front.
Yeah.
In fact, January itself is usually fairly quiet till the end of it and people start to get their pre-NWC stuff going on.
Quite. But we've had a few good ones actually.
Yeah.
Actually, we should probably mention that we got our own one within Informa, which is sort of merged with a company called Tech Target. It's not necessarily telecoms-y, but it is tech sector. And so our bit of Informa is going to become part of this bit that's going to be effectively half Tech Target and half Informa. It's kind of weird how these things work because Tech Target's still going to be listed, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think it's actually in a broad strategic way, leaving aside any speculation about what it might mean for me personally, professionally, and I'm actually not worried. It feels like a strong statement of intent in that I think what Tech Target's really good at is digital marketing and all the stuff all the stuff that really good digital media companies are good at, which is identifying their audience and segmenting it, and and properly exploiting it to the market.
Yeah.
And I use exploit in a literal sense rather than a pejorative sense. And so they're really good at that. And it's not necessarily something, I think we've always been pretty good, although I would say that at the journalistic side, but we're not necessarily that good at getting maximum revenue out of the audience that we generate through our journalism. And this isn't, by the way, a knock on any of our salespeople. This is more about the systems that I think people like TechTarget will bring in. So, assuming that it all goes according to plan, it could be really positive, and then we'll of course both get massive pay rises because
that'll happen
because we're doing so well. So there's that. But the even bigger M&A than that this week was HPE Enterprise. Went forked out $14 billion, which is fairly big M&A at any time, isn't it?
Well, I think it's the biggest move of a network vendor for another network vendor.
Right.
Since probably 2016.
Which was what?
Which was Nokia buying Alcatel-Lucent, which was 15.6 billion euros.
And that was like an absolutely existential move by Nokia, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that's obviously more of a telecom move, whereas these companies are known more for their activities in the enterprise space.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, you've been writing a hell of a lot more on this. I haven't written anything on it, but Telecoms.com obviously has. Yeah. But you've been writing a lot on it. So in a minute, I will very much cede the floor to you. But I'll just tee it up. So, we know about Juniper Networks. We had Tom, what's his name? Tom whatever. I've forgotten his surname.
We had Neil McRae on. He's very much a Juniper person.
Oh, yeah. Am I confusing Tom? He was someone else. He was Freshwave. Sorry, Tom. Yeah, so Neil.
Yeah.
Right.
You start drinking again.
I'll be greater clarity. That's true.
Maybe a couple of cigarettes.
We got to get Neil on to comment on this. See if he wants to keep his job. I think it's a load of bollocks. And you're like, okay, is this you handing in your notice, Ian? Neil? Yes. So Juniper Networks, obviously a networks company, but I'm not going to waffle anymore. I'm going to hand it over to you. What to start off with, Ian? What is the significance of this for telecoms?
Well, that's one of the concerns about it. Actually, is what the significance of it is for telecoms, because Juniper's big businesses these days and the ones that are kind of driving growth aren't the telecom side. Actually, has been. I think it's either been in decline or flat over the last sort of 9 months, and the cloud side of it similar. The bit that's really been kind of driving growth from it is the stuff they do in the enterprise sector.
Yeah,
and that's the biggest of those kind of three divisions, the way they break up their customer numbers.
And what does enterprise mean in Juniper's context? What do they do for companies?
Well, it could be any. It's. I mean, the thing they're really known for is network equipment for the enterprise sector.
So, like private networks.
Well, it might be that. It could be private networks.
Could be like self-contained sort of Wi-Fi or weapons-grade Wi-Fi.
I mean, the thing I suppose they're originally what they're known for, and is they're a big competitor to Cisco in that market.
Switches
and routers. That's the kind of legacy stuff, and they do have a big role in telecom. I'm not saying that they're not a significant telecom player, unlike HPE, by the way, which isn't a significant player of telecom.
But what was the big telecoms buy it did about a decade ago or something? Aruba, was it?
Yeah, I mean, that's not really a telecom buy, though.
Okay.
So it's similar.
There was another one that had a 3 in it.
I don't know, but the Aruba thing's very relevant to this particular deal. The Aruba deal, which HPE made in 2015. So, I mean, a little bit of history.
3Com.
HPE is obviously a successor company to Hewlett-Packard, the big IT equipment maker. Did computers, printers, as well as a bunch of, server equipment and various other IT goodies. Up till, I think, 2014, 2015, and then it sort of did the splits, into two. It split itself in this slightly strange move.
The printers and the laptops.
Printers and laptops is still Hewlett-Packard, or HP, I think.
Which is like a 1% growth or whatever. Yeah. Boring company.
You go to your PC World or whatever it is these days,
and
still buy Hewlett-Packard computers, and they're very much a kind of rival to people like Dell and Lenovo, still in that space, and probably still do printer equipment. I don't really know. I'm not really up on what's going on in printers these days. Does anybody still print stuff out? I don't know.
I do,
but there you are. So you might even have a Hewlett-Packard printer.
I think most people need. It's the whole quick tangent. The whole domestic printer market is the printers themselves are loss leaders, and then every time you printed something, it costs you about a tenner. In ink.
Yeah. So that's the Hewlett Packard bit, and then the other bit was Hewlett Packard Enterprise. The sort of B2B sort of facing side of it, as opposed to the consumer facing side of it. And what they do these days is, they break it down by sort of customer segment, really, or product area in the way that Juniper would do. But they sell storage equipment, they sell computing, IT equipment to enterprises, servers. A lot of they're one of the big server companies, in the way that Dell and what would the other one be? Supermicro. Those would be the three, really: Dell, HPE, and Supermicro.
For servers?
For servers, yeah.
Okay.
And they do, one of the significant things they have done in the last few years, big takeover move that came not that long after this kind of doing the splits, was this takeover of a company called Aruba Networks for about $3 billion, I think.
I just looked it up. Yeah. Spot on, mate. That's what Wikipedia says, so it must be right.
Got to be right, yeah. So they bought Aruba for about $3 billion, and that has made them into a much bigger networks player. And that's been, in a way, the thing that's actually been driving their growth recently. I mean, it's been really high, double-digit rate, I think sort of 41% in the last fiscal year, sales growth. They've got a guy called Phil Mottram in charge of that as general manager.
That name rings a bell.
Well, he's talked, I think, in the past potentially about coming on the podcast.
Okay, right.
I mean, I don't really know. It's interesting because I don't know what this move really means for his role, because the guy who's going to take over the whole of the network stuff is actually Juniper's boss, Rami Rahim. And it kind of raises questions about where Phil Mottram fits in now as the guy who's been general manager of Aruba Networks. But Aruba Networks, among other, it does things like enterprise Wi-Fi. They're one of the big players in Wi-Fi, setting up Wi-Fi systems for campus networks and this kind of thing. I actually went, if you remember, last year to Rome with HPE.
Ryder Cup.
Yeah, and the big thing they were doing there was installing Wi-Fi hotspots, connecting it by backhaul to fibre, doing a lot of the analytics, that you get at the golf, which could be used by players and coaches for all sorts of whizzy things, and tracking football.
Yourself better at
they have this cloud platform called GreenLake. That's it's not a public cloud like AWS and Microsoft and those guys, but it's private cloud. Software as a service type, part of the business. And Aruba's really been kind of on a tear over the last sort of couple of years, at least. Okay. Certainly the last year.
And they've still kept that name within HP, haven't they?
I mean, they call it Intelligent Edge, I think. They call the sort of business that Aruba's in Intelligent Edge, but I think it's basically Aruba plus some stuff that they did before that's kind of been mingled in with it. And it's Aruba's the bit, this Intelligent Edge bit is really the bit that the takeover of Juniper affects. So the standout message that Antonio Neri, he's the CEO of HPE, gave on the call with reporters, the Q&A with reporters, was that this basically makes us a networking company. It's quite significant. I mean, before HPE was you look at the breakdown of its revenues, and a huge amount's coming from storage, a huge amount's coming from compute. Yeah. And then you've got Aruba and a couple of other things. All of a sudden, with this combination with Juniper, most of their revenues are coming from, it's over 60% now, is network-related revenues.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that the telecom side of things, which was, I don't know how big, let's say it's a third of the size of Juniper altogether, something like that, is now obviously, as a part of the combined thing, Juniper's service provider business is quite small now in terms of the overall picture. It's like 18% of revenues.
Right.
And I don't know what HPE was generating from telecom customers per se, but it's probably quite small. They don't really have a massive presence in that market. They're trying to get into that market, by the way. And you asked before we came on, is Open RAN relevant here?
Yeah.
Which it is. So one of the things that HPE does and is trying to do more of is selling the common off-the-shelf equipment, it gets called by telcos, that you could put network software on. COTS equipment. Yeah. So the sort of servers that they sell for use in data centers to support IT workloads would be sold to telecom operators and used or actually sold to cloud companies and used to support telecom workloads.
So is that coming into a similar conceptual area as like sort of general purpose chips doing telecom stuff.
It's virtualization, really.
Yeah.
I mean,
basically you're using non-bespoke shit to do bespoke stuff.
It's virtualization, essentially. And when it comes to the RAN, the radio access network, it tends to get sort of lumped in with Open RAN, which is not quite the same thing. We talked about that loads in the past, but it's sort of in that area.
And will in the future, no doubt.
So the idea is, HPE comes along with its, COTS equipment, and it's running Intel chips probably, and you put someone like Ericsson or Nokia could put their software on it, and you deploy it in a data center, and you can share resources and realize benefits that way, and that's the pitch, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, obviously that market has not really taken off in the way that its supporters would like. It's still relatively small in the bigger scheme of things. Most equipment's still kind of purpose-built, traditional, certainly on the radio access network side of things. It's gone a bit further in other areas, but they're a pretty small player in telecom. And although this move by them makes telecom a bigger part of their business, it actually makes telecom a relatively small in terms of the overall entity, if you see what I mean. So I spoke with, I didn't speak, I communicated via email with one of my colleagues, a guy called Sterling Perrin, who's principal analyst at Heavy Reading, which is like a sister company to Light Reading, obviously, and he's very much in the whole optical area.
I see.
And has covered people like Juniper for a long time and knows more about them than I'll forget, all that sort of stuff. And one of his concerns, one of the things that he raised is, he put it quite succinctly. He said the E in HPE stands for enterprise. They're an enterprise-focused company. I'm pretty worried. Juniper's been very, very well regarded, by the way. This is a point that various analysts made to me, for the quality of its telecom products. Right. It's really kind of regarded as an innovator in the stuff that it does. And having it swallowed up by this mainly enterprise-focused business at a time when the telecom market's pretty stagnant, and Juniper's telecom business hasn't been doing very well, not to do with the quality of it, just because I think
the fact is, I mean, we've spoken about it over the past year. Operators are not spending a lot of money.
They're not spending a lot of money, and I think that there was a concern expressed by Sterling that what happens to telecom, does it become a kind of secondary concern? Is it no longer a priority? Is there a worry about them taking their eye off that business, and all the effort goes into the fast-growing enterprise market rather than serving telecom demands? And that is a concern. And it was interesting on the Q&A, there's various people raising questions about this. What do you have to offer telcos, and what does this mean for your 5G activities? And so I think there's a bit of concern.
They've got a lot of explaining to do.
They've got some explaining to do, and I'm not convinced by some of the pitch that was made on the Q&A, I have to say. Do you remember a few years ago when Nokia was led by Rajiv Suri?
Yeah.
And they had this thing about having an end-to-end product portfolio.
When they bought Alcatel-Lucent.
When they bought Alcatel-Lucent, it's very much pitched on, we've got an end-to-end portfolio. And the idea was you could take the sort of RAN stuff that Nokia does and the core stuff that...
And it's all in one...
And the IP and optical transport stuff that Alcatel-Lucent does, and you can package it all together into this nice end-to-end, fully integrated product for a telco. And then Pekka Lundmark, who's the current CEO, comes along in 2020.
That's not how people...
And he goes, that's not how people... Exactly, pretty much how he put it. And completely scrapped that. And
it turned out it was a shit idea, basically.
And yet, Juniper's rationale for why... one of the sort of arguments they made on this Q&A, which is put forward by Rahim Rami... Is it Rami Rahim? Rami Rahim, sorry. Was that it would allow them to offer these sorts of products in a fully integrated way.
Enterprise network.
Yeah, and they kind of made a big deal. I mean, there were a few things
they always want to sell solutions, don't they?
They always want to sell
products.
solutions. They said fully. So one of the big concerns about 5G Open RAN is that you've got to put all this stuff together and integrate it, and we can actually come along with a fully integrated product set. But he prefaced that by talking about all this sort of optical and core stuff, which that's not how operators buy things. I mean, if you look at the way nobody does deals like that, really. They'll pick their RAN.
You don't get Vodafone going, "Oi, Ericsson, sort everything out."
Yeah, exactly. No one would want to do that. So that's one concern. The other thing that I found a bit odd is this idea that they were sort of trying to suggests they have some kind of comprehensive 5G offer now because of this move, but they don't. They're not really a radio access networks player. So what Juniper has is this, you've heard of the RIC, the RAN intelligent controller, which is this sort of whizzy thing that's pitched as a possible component of future 5G Open RAN networks. It basically give you more control over, it's almost like an app store in a way, I guess you could think of it, for the network, where you could introduce features for the
Is this like an evolution of the concept of NFV?
It's an evolution of the concept of self-organizing networks,
right?
Where you have applications that would manage the network that you can roll out. You put them on top of this RIC, like a software application that you roll out. But instead of it being an application for your phone, it's an application for the network. So what it might do is power down base stations in the evening when there's not any traffic driving through that area or something.
So it makes the whole thing more fine-tuned and bespoke.
Yeah, and the thing, the question's always been, well, can't you do that with a non-Open RAN network? And apparently the guys who are sort of into Open RAN will say that this is something that was largely ignored by 3GPP. I mean, they do have SON, this self-organising.
Yeah, that's been around for a while.
But I don't think it's as dynamic. I don't think it's as real time. That's the idea, as what they've come up with it. And tweakable, yeah. So Juniper has one of those. It has one of those platforms. HPE's obviously got its server business, which Antonio Neri talked up in the call. It's got this, it's working with companies like, obviously Intel, but some other chip makers. Ampere Computing's one that's doing ARM-based chips.
Yeah, and with everything getting more and more cloudy,
they're kind of quite involved with the big.
But I don't see why. I don't know if this is something they said, but I don't see why it would necessarily be appealing to buy your networking kit off someone who's also got a shitload of servers. And all that sort of thing.
No, and the thing is, even with those servers and even with that RIC, the big gap they've got is they don't make radios. Right. And they don't do RAN software. The companies that do the radios and the RAN software, which are obviously the most important things in a radio access network, are the Ericssons and the Nokias of this world. What was interesting, another analyst I spoke to is Jennifer Pigg-Clark, who's also heavy reading and in this kind of area, and she raised the interesting thing about Juniper having a long-standing partnership with Ericsson, which dates back to something like 2018. So I remember that being announced at the time, and again, it was very much one of these. If an operator does want to do something in a bit more of an integrated way, they can take our RAN stuff and bring some of.
Takes me back to. Do you remember Cisco Ericsson partnership? A fucking waste of time.
But this was when this Juniper thing got announced. I think one of the questions was how does it affect your Cisco partnership? Because isn't Cisco doing some of the things that Juniper? Yeah.
And they went, what? What's Cisco partnership?
But I think what Jennifer was saying is it'd be quite interesting to see whether this is advantageous for Ericsson, because it's obviously worked with HPE in the past.
Yeah.
Simply because HPE is one of the server companies. There aren't very many of them. So if you're taking any interest at all in virtualization, you're going to be having something to do with Dell and HPE. And it's a partner of Juniper. So maybe we could see those three companies, I mean, it's only going to be two companies in future because it's the new look HPE with Juniper plus Ericsson doing some kind of offer for operators that want to buy things in that way. But I still go back to Pekka Lundmark's point that I just find it very odd that anybody would want to come along and get these components from the core, from transport, and from the RAN side of things from one company. Open RAN's about disaggregation. It's not about integration. There's the integration.
Well, as we've said loads of times, what's the point in it being Open RAN if one supplier is doing all your stuff?
Yeah, but having said all that, and I'm kind of knocking the rationale for the deal, that's very much a telecom concern of it. There's obviously the bigger part is the enterprise side of things, and that's where a lot of the analyst attention's been. And one of the concerns they've got there
they've dangled AI as a topical.
This is how the thing's been sold. It's been sold as an AI deal more than anything else.
How's that then?
Well, so one of the things that's been called out repeatedly on calls, I think, and in releases, is this thing that Juniper has called Mist AI that you might have heard of.
I haven't. No.
So it's an AI system basically for managing enterprise networks. You use it to sort of address problems before they arise, and make improvements to customer experience kind of on the fly, that sort of thing. And I think one of the reasons that...
Which is a lot of what AI is going to be doing on an enterprise
I think level. Mist, which is very highly regarded, one of the reasons the deal's gone through is heavily about that capability. The concern is that some of the stuff that HPE does on the Aruba side overlaps with that. There's quite a bit of overlap between these two portfolios. So, and what they've said is, they got asked this question, and Juniper's CEO went, I'm not worried about overlap because at the moment the opportunities for cross-selling and upselling are bigger. But at some point, we're not going to have two portfolios, we're going to have one.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to bring things together.
Well, a mega M&A takes ages to fucking play out.
And that's the worrying thing, I suppose, from an employee perspective as well, is this whole concept of in synergies, which you expect to see whenever there's, like you say, mega M&A, you always expect that. But it's 450 million a year they're looking to save in costs. I mean, they've always
got to come up with, when they're doing their little prospectus for mega M&A, that's always one of the figures they got to say. Here are the synergies in terms of money.
Yeah.
And they're always just pulling numbers out their arse. I mean, they would have had some very skilled, highly paid experts do the number crunching, but it's still guessing, really.
It is, but if it's at that kind of level, it's potentially got a big impact on employee numbers. You wouldn't expect them not to take some staff out. I think together, by the way, they have about 70,000 members of staff. When the deal goes through, they'll have about 70,000.
Well, there'll certainly be synergies
based on
that
current
one.
Numbers.
Efficiencies.
Yeah, and you'd expect there to be quite a lot of redundancies happening as a consequence, which is just a normal thing to expect, I suppose, of a merger of that scale. They're also quite heavily indebted after it. So the fee, which is, you mentioned, 14 billion, I think it's at about a third premium to the share price of Juniper before the deal went through.
It was about 30.
But it's
$40 and it was a 30.
It involves HPE taking on more debt. So I think it's that metric that gets cited a lot these days, net debt to EBITDA, goes up to about 3.3 after the deal. And they want to get that back down to 2 within 2 years of the deal closing. So they've either got to grow sales quite well, or they've got to take a lot of cost out.
Yes.
And the market's not, bits of the markets that they're in are not great at the moment. So, you kind of wonder whether...
But you say HPE on the whole, because I don't really track them very closely, I've got to be honest. You say
neither do
HPE on the whole...
Only when it's to do with telecom, usually.
Or golf.
Or golf, yeah.
But HPE on the whole, perhaps just from your research this week, has been doing all right, yeah? It's been making decent wedge.
It's been doing all right at the Aruba side of things. It's been doing brilliantly at the Aruba side of things. But that's been off on a tear. The computing and storage has been in decline quite badly, actually. I think
it must be a fucking cutthroat market.
In the last,
like Dell,
I think the last 9 months, or I can't remember if they've reported recent fiscal year yet, or if it's a 9 month. But I did look at the numbers, and they're not good on the compute and storage side of things.
And I was looking. I mean, HP is one of those companies that intrigues me because they're so acquisitive. Like about 10, 20 years ago, it was Cisco. They just go off buying random shit. They buy like a domestic router. They bought some webcam. They just go, fuck it, let's buy that. And HP has been like that. And then just looking at my little bit of clicking about. So I was reminded of 3Com.
3Com, okay,
which was a networking company, which they bought in 2010.
Okay.
And I've gone onto Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great for this list of.
Well, 3Com's probably that's probably a lot of that stuff. I imagine has ended up with Aruba in this.
I would imagine so. Yeah, that's right. So that was networking, and they paid 2.7 billion in 2010 for that.
Yeah.
On the enterprise side, I mean, there's the most hilarious bit of M&A, which is autonomy, which was in 2011, which they paid 11 billion for, and it turned out. Well, I better be careful because there's all sorts of litigation going around this. But the CEO of Autonomy is alleged by HP to have completely taken them for a ride and fucking lied about all the metrics.
I do remember something about that.
Yeah, he's still, I forget his name. He's sort of like sneaky looking bloke. But they've been in litigation for ages because they basically paid 11 bill and I think they wrote it all off.
Wow.
That's a fuck of a lot, isn't it?
That was presumably well before the split into HP?
Yeah, so that's 2011. Yeah. And their thing, I remember looking into it at the time just because it was mega M&A, their thing was unstructured data.
Right.
That was a big thing at the time, like video, stuff that doesn't have meta tags, stuff that isn't already in a database form. How do you sort that out? That was their big punt on unstructured data, and it turned out to be a shit idea.
Right.
But, that doesn't put them off. They still go around buying stuff. And then there was the Aruba thing, which, what does it say here? The acquisition, 3 billion. So that's actually not that bad.
Yeah.
So that was 3 billion.
I think it was making 770 million a year in annual revenues at the time.
Right.
But the combination of the Intelligent Edge is now making about 1.2 billion a quarter.
Right.
I mean, obviously that's not just Aruba. That would have been the 3Com stuff, I'm guessing, and the other things they had. But it's really grown. You look at the performance of the Intelligent Edge, and it's doing well.
I'll tell you, you should go onto Wikipedia and just Google list of acquisitions by HP. Right. It's so long. I mean, it is a company that's been around forever, but there's just some really big ones. I mean, there was Compaq. You remember Compaq with a Q on the end?
Mm. Yeah. The computer maker,
yeah,
PC maker.
They were expensive laptops.
That was like a .com bubble one. Although actually they did it just after the .com bubble bursted, which makes it an even more of an incredibly reckless thing. How much do you reckon they paid for Compaq? Bear in mind this is in September 2001.
Oh, no idea.
25 bill.
25 billion. Wow.
I know, and it was just PCs, and no one gives a fuck about PCs now.
Wow.
I wouldn't say that.
Well, they're commodity goods, though, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean,
unless it's one of those.
Says a guy using a PC.
I mean, from a business journalist point of view, obviously everyone needs a PC, but it's not a very exciting growth market. It's very commoditized. It's very mature. It's not an area that if you were looking to make some money, you wouldn't go, I'll tell you what, why don't we three of us start up a PC company?
No, you do spectacles that connect you to the metaverse.
Yeah, and so they got all that. What is it? The
metaverse is only for people who have good eyesight. It's casting everyone else.
EDS, which was like a system integrator consulting firm. 14 bill in 2008.
Yeah.
Then there's 3Com, which is 2.7 bill. Autonomy, like I said, 11. Samsung's printing business for $1 bill. Anyway, so they've just been buying like crazy. So I guess, and the fact they bought it with a lot of debt always alarms me because it puts different kinds of pressure on the acquisition as well.
Yeah.
Do you think? I mean, on the whole, and by all means, say what you're about to say. But on top of that, when we talk about mega M&A, we generally just make an initial shoot from the hip verdict as to whether it's a good move or not. So on top of whatever else you want to say, just tell me whether you think it's a good move or not.
I don't know. I think there's things about it that make sense. And there's concerns about it, I'd say. It's one of those ones where I sound like I'm sitting on the fence.
No, it's not. It's a bit like when we're talking about Ericsson and Vonage. You can see some of the rationale, but you're not totally sold.
It's maybe a harder one for me to be a judge on as well, because a lot of it's in areas that I don't really know that much about. I mean, I think from the telecom side of things, which is the bit I do know more about, it certainly makes HPE a bigger force in telecom, but I don't go along with the rationale they can. I mean, I wrote a story with a headline that the pitch is flawed. They wouldn't be particularly happy with my take on
that's
it.
That's the lead featured story.
That was the last one I did.
At the moment.
Oh, is it? And I just felt this it was like they were resurrecting this end-to-end idea that Rajiv Suri was going on about previously. And if they think there's an opportunity to grow sales by marketing things in that way, I think they're going to have a really tough time of it. And that's not to say that they can't do reasonably well in this market. And Juniper's products are really highly regarded, but it's not a good market to be in at the moment. That whole horrible slowdown that happened last year that's really affected the big kit vendors in telecom like Ericsson and Nokia extremely badly.
It's not showing a lot of sign of picking up, is it? That's caught Juniper as well. I mean, its service provider sales aren't in a great place. And, I don't think they're going to... I think we're going to have to move to a different sector.
Like enterprise networking, maybe.
I mean, that's boring.
but the concern on the enterprise side is bringing these two things together, because you know what happens when. Now, here's another parallel with Nokia Alcatel-Lucent. Actually, one of the things that apparently tripped them up is, Alcatel-Lucent has all this core and IP and fixed stuff that Nokia didn't do, but it also had a mobile infrastructure business. And I think it was the integration of that with Alcatel-Lucent that it was blamed subsequently by them for some of the problems they had in the early days of 5G, when they kind of lost the plot really, and they made some questionable decisions and seemed to take their eye off the ball. I remember talking to the former CFO about it actually, and he was saying that the merger activities had kind of been. I don't know if he put it as a distraction, but it was certainly something that factored into.
Well, it is. Happened. I mean, the thing is. You're dealing with senior execs who are presumably all very clever and competent and expert, but there's only so many hours in the day.
Yeah.
And if a big chunk of that is taken up by something extraordinary, then you're spending less time on the core stuff. I mean, it's simple, isn't it?
And that's the concern in a different market, obviously. But I think bringing together Aruba and Mist these two things that need kind of combining, that's going to be quite hard to do. You know, it's like, there's a question, do you just sort of, you're not going to scrap one, and presumably they're not just going to replace everything that they had in Aruba that was relevant to Mist with Mist. They're probably going to look at the two portfolios.
So where will they complement each other?
Where do they complement each other? Which things go?
A super solution that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah.
Which can often look great on PowerPoint, but then in practice.
Well, it sounds like a really interesting point that Raymond James is like a broker firm, that they made about it in a note that I got sent, was that apparently they've been quite critical in the past of Cisco, both Juniper and HPE in this market, for being overly complex. Like the solutions it provides are the campus solutions it provides are overly complicated.
I mean, they've obviously got a competitive incentive to be critical of.
They have, but the rationale that it's overly complicated and our things are quite neat and simple.
Now
this combination could end up making it equally complicated. It might tick more boxes, but it's a more kind of complicated portfolio, a more complicated offering than you had previously. It sort of undermines your former argument, and it's just a hard thing to execute, I think. So that's the challenging thing.
And then just one other thing I want to say on that one, and then if after that you've got any sort of last thoughts on this bit of M&A, then feel free. There was another story, but I just sort of thought of the two things sort of slightly merge in my mind, and I'll run this past you and see if you think I'm talking shit. But I wrote a story. I was quite happy with the headline. I said, Dish gets 50 million on a plate for new Open RAN development centre. And I even put a picture of a dish/plate on the story to labour the pun. And so this American state organization called the NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, has got a bunch of money for a thing. I'm just going to click on that hyperlink. Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund, or Innovation Fund for short. For once, they've managed to come up with something that hasn't got a cheesy acronym like the CHIPS Act or something like that. And so they got some money, a bit like we've got in the UK. Every now and then, obviously on a much smaller scale, you hear the government announce that they've chucked 20 mil at some project. Well, they've, or more like 20K.
Yeah.
And so they've chucked 50 mil at Dish to come up with this thing they're calling the Open RAN Centre for Integration and Deployment, or ORCID. ORCID. Actually, that's good. ORCID works, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah, okay.
And anyway, I mean, it actually doesn't seem like a bad idea because, it's like one of those things, a bit like that Rakuten one we went to in person. Remember when we got lost on the way?
Yeah. God,
yeah. Where, it's one of these interoperability centres where everyone brings their kit in and sees if it works with each other and all that sort of thing. But then their rationale is Dish has actually got a live commercial Open RAN network. So, using slightly sciencey terms, I said, you can combine in vitro, which literally the etymology means in glass, but it's used in science to mean in lab conditions. You can combine in vitro in a normal sort of interoperability testing environment with in vivo, which means literally in life, i.e. in real life, because Dish has got this live Open RAN network. So it doesn't seem like a bad idea. But the main reason I bring it up, it's just a reminder of how America is still chucking money at Open RAN.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought of this HPE thing buying and wondering if there was an Open RAN aspect of it. Because it seems quite clear that if you're an American company and you make the right noises about Open RAN, and to a lesser extent this applies in the UK as well, then you can probably get a bit of easy public money.
There's definitely an Open RAN side to it, yeah. I mean, I've long before this happened, I've liaised quite a lot with HPE and written a fair few stories on them to do with Open RAN. I mean, I'd say more virtual RAN than Open RAN actually, but let's use Open RAN as a kind of umbrella term, for both those things. And they definitely have a play in that. And I also think what they're doing is quite interesting because they've talked a lot in the past about the need to... So one of the concerns that I've always written about is this over-reliance on Intel as a chip supplier in that market, simply because Intel is the dominant force in general-purpose processors. And there aren't really... The only real alternative these days is AMD. There's long been this sort of effort to try and get ARM, which is the rival architecture that's better known for the sort of blueprints that you use in smartphone chips.
Yeah. And other embedded
stuff. But there's long been a sort of push to get them make them a bigger force, if you like, in that market, driven by them and their kind of licensees, and it's never really gone anywhere. And one of the first stories I wrote this year actually is Arm is sort of coming now. It's kind of starting to establish itself in the virtual RAN market, or there are signs of options happening. There are kind of moves by various players to develop ARM-based chips, basically, that you could use in an HPE server.
And they've been trying for a while. When I used to cover ARM before this job, 2 jobs before this, when I was at a place called Hexus, I got to know ARM quite well.
Yeah.
Because Hexus was a big x86 chip.
Which is the Intel system, obviously.
Yeah, which is what Intel and AMD run on. And then this was about 2007 when the modern day smartphone was just emerging with the first iPhone, the first Android phones, and I was like, oh, hold on a sec. Turns out there's an English company that is behind all the chips that's in all these fucking phones, which I didn't even realise at the time because I was still learning about it. So I got to know them, and their chief marketing guy was an ex-Intel guy who obviously felt some degree of at least competitiveness, if not antagonism, towards Intel. And he was whispering my ear.
That still goes on now.
Yeah, he was whispering my ear even back then. You watch, we're coming for Intel and servers.
But never really
went
sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, it's taken a while, hasn't it? Because that would have been 15 years ago.
It's kind of happening now. I mean, it's, the piece I wrote drew attention to various initiatives that are going on, but it's how much traction they can build this year will be really interesting to see. But there's definitely a lot of initiatives going on about getting ARM-based chips. And some of it comes from the hyperscalers, like the work that Amazon's done with its own Graviton processors, which are ARM-based, and you can use those for Nokia's done some stuff where it's put RAN software on those.
Yeah.
There's this company called Ampere Computing, which is backed by Oracle and run by someone who used to work at Intel, but they're doing ARM-based processors and they're pitching some of that for the virtual RAN. So that's where I'm quite impressed with HPE.
And of course,
is there in that?
In these excellent Mac chips, they're all ARM-based.
Yeah.
So ARM's definitely catching up. I mean, the old paradigm, when I was first learning about it, is x86 are more powerful, but they're more power inefficient and hotter. So they're great for data centers where there's cooling and all that sort of thing, and even great for PCs that have got a fan.
Yeah.
But they're shit for stuff that you want to keep in your pocket without burning your bollocks off.
Yeah.
So that was the paradigm. And then on the flip side, ARM is great for heat efficiency and general efficiency, but it doesn't have the grunt of an x86 chip. But now we've got things like these what are we up to, M3, M4, M5? M3. And they seem to be pretty powerful. They bench test pretty well compared to x86, don't they? Yeah.
One of the things that's happening or has happened quite recently with ARM is the introduction of something called vector processing. So like older chips, older GPPs were very much based on scalar processing.
Right.
And Intel has long had this. There's long been this sort of system in x86 called, Christ, I can't remember the acronym now, but it's basically something that supports vector processing. A little bit like GPUs. The thing about GPUs, you can do lots of parallel stuff at the same time. It's like you can process an array of numbers with vector processing.
And I've got a segment in a bit on GPUs.
Yeah, so it's basically about looking at an array of numbers at the same time rather than doing sort of things on an individual basis. And when I've talked to Ericsson about this, a guy called Matteo Fiorani there, who's like basically the head of their distributed unit business, because they're quite interested in getting ARM-based processors into the market as well. So they've got an alternative to Intel, basically, in this in this.
I've seen you've written already this year about the Ericsson Intel.
And he was really impressed at some of the stuff that's happening on vector processing on the ARM side now. There's this thing called SVE2, I think, which stands for something vector extension or something like that. But it's a system that ARM's been sort of introducing, I think, into some of its latest designs, and that would. He was saying this would really, really help when it comes to the radio access network. It would actually deal with some of those problems that you just talked about to do with the chips being less powerful. And clearly, you've still got this problem, I think, on the layer one side, which is the kind of really demanding software in the RAN. If you separate it into different categories, that's the physical layer, the kind of compute hungry bit. There's still a view there that you do need some kind of acceleration, some kind of customized chip.
Yes.
The question is to what extent, how much are you going to rely on that, and how much are you going to rely on the GPP, the general purpose processor? There's different views on that, but
I was just reminded. I don't want to go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah, we should.
We've been talking about x86 versus ARM, but there's also this thing called RISC-V.
There's RISC-V. Yeah.
RISC-V. Oh, okay, I was calling it RISC-V. Yeah. And I just looked on the internet on Google I just saw...
It's a bigger deal in China apparently now because of trade restrictions.
Well, again, actually that overlaps. I might as well do that segment right now. But on my Google search, one of the questions was, is RISC-V, I keep wanting to call it RISC-V because it's Roman numerals, better than ARM? And the quick response is it's higher performance.
Right.
RISC-V-based processors can deliver higher performance than proprietary processors for certain blah, 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 blah. Anyway.
I mean, I'd heard there's not a lot of difference. The main difference between the two of them is that RISC-V is open source.
Yeah, that's the key. Well,
so you don't have that issue of paying licensing fees.
RISC stands for Reduced Instruction Set Computing,
which is what ARM is
as well.
It's Advanced RISC Machines, I think, is what the acronym stands for, isn't it? So
until they decided it's not an acronym anymore and they just named after a part of your body.
Yeah.
I mean, what next? A new company
you get likely to do interesting headlines like ARM Wrestle for Virtual RAN will challenge Intel this year, which is what I think I wrote a week ago.
Well, let me move it on to... So we've got probably about 4 segments this week. So we'll make these sort of long tail ones relatively short and sweet.
It's not drinking. It's not good, is it, on the podcast? You sort of feel like having one when you're about an hour in or whatever. Probably an hour in now.
We shouldn't leave these bottles here. I'm looking at them. I'm looking at them.
I don't know how we ever coped in the days when we didn't drink.
With almost sexual desire at this stage. Look at the curves on that bottle. But we're strong. We can handle it.
Yeah.
I'm just hearing the can opening sound like...
I'm looking forward to my alcohol-free one afterwards.
Just that Friday, that first one on a Friday, you're like, the weekend's starting now, isn't it? So I wrote, my very first story of the year was headlined, Chinese companies reportedly turning to Huawei for AI chips. And this was, who was I journalising? Wall Street Journal. I said, according to the WSJ's handy people familiar with the matter. This is what people like Wall Street Journal, FT, New York Times do. They've always got these sources, which, by the way, if anyone wonders, I probably said this before, when they have these supposed leaks or these anonymous sources, they're nearly always official leaks. It's not just some rando who's gone, fuck it, this needs to get out there. It will have been someone with a commercial agenda leaking it, giving an exclusive to one of these companies like Bloomberg or Wall Street Journal or whatever. And it's a sort of, it's not unethical, but it's not purely ethical. There's a synergy. There's an understanding between the publication that they protect the person's anonymity and basically support their agenda in return for a scoop. So it's fine. I'm not saying it's wrong, but don't think it's just this pure, like, Edward Snowden type of thing where it's a whistleblower or something like that. Although more on whistleblowers in a bit, eh? Mm-hmm. Look at us setting up these segues. That's the benefit of being sober. You notice these things. Anyway, so the post of this story was a Wall Street Journal story. Let me click through on that and say what their headline was. NVIDIA's new China pickle. Customers don't want its downgraded chips. So long and short of this is... we know the US for about 3 years now has been coming up with unilateral sanctions on China with the main, and they pretty much admit this, with the main aim of just making them less good at technology. I still think in a purely moral way, in a strategic way, in a geopolitical way, I think it's totally understandable. In a purely moral way, I don't think they got a leg to stand on. Why do they get to shit on someone else just because they don't want them catching up with them? All they're doing is just throwing their weight around as the world's most powerful country. Mm. And so that's what they're doing with China. Obviously, no one's going to get the violin out too much for China because they're pretty fucking powerful as well. But, and there was an interesting thing that actually reminded me of a story that I linked back to that I wrote back at last March. Where's the link?
Is NVIDIA going to be okay, do you think?
Do you know what I mean?
The stock is only 12%.
Are NVIDIA shareholders going to be all right?
Past week.
Jensen Huang going to be able to buy another country. This is a thing I wrote in March 23, covering a report which was also first covered previously by Light Reading, I must add. Who covered that? It'd probably be Robert Clark, wouldn't it? It was. If it was Australian. And so his headline was China dominates research in 6G and optical report. And so I led with that. My headline on that was China is miles ahead on telecoms research. And then there was a little table showing little areas within subsets of technology research and who's the lead country. So there's one called Advanced Material Manufacturing, in which they have 10 subheadings, starting with nanoscale materials, coatings, all sorts of high-tech. And basically China's the lead country in all 12 of them.
Right.
And then the one that was most relevant to us and most relevant to this segment was artificial intelligence, computing and communications. No Oxford comma there, I should note.
I mean, it sounds, just to sort of interject, it sounds like they've sort of missed a trick, though, in that research. Because China clearly isn't ahead when it comes to high-end chip design.
Well, hold on.
Right.
So in this second segment, which has got, I think, 10 sub-segments in it, China is ahead on 7.
Right.
So it's ahead on 5G and 6G, optical. This is the main purpose of both the light reading and the Telecoms.com stories on that. But then also it's relevant to this. And it's only once you get down to the last 3 that USA is the lead one, which is high-performance computing, advanced integrated circuit design and fabrication, and natural language processing, i.e. the more ChatGPT type of stuff, as opposed to the kind of AI, because they are ahead. China is considered to be ahead, according to this thing, on AI algorithms and hardware accelerators, which is interesting. I don't quite get how they get that.
I find some of this a bit spurious.
Yeah, well, this was a thing from nearly a year ago by one Australian. But the point is,
I mean, what are the big AI companies from China that we would think about when we talk about big AI companies? Because
I don't know, but I don't know much about China at all.
Maybe it's just because we're shut off from that market, but I think it's hard to
maybe Alibaba's really good at it. I don't know.
Because they're so insular these days, and
exactly.
So now in the last
it's hard to know. It's hard to answer that question.
I don't know what they've used to measure it against other companies.
Exactly.
That's the problem.
But the reason I bring it up is not because this is definitive, but because it frames this story. So China's already really good at AI. Let's just take this at face value for now, yeah? China's already really good at AI, but what they're not very good at is high-performance computing.
Yeah.
So what does America do? It restricts their access to high-performance computing.
Yeah.
So, if they were just working off this table alone, and I'm sure they're working off a little bit more intelligence than that, they would go, okay, we're behind on fucking everything except high-performance computing, so then let's use that to our advantage. And so what they've done, if they said to NVIDIA, which is obviously a US company and is the world leader, and that's why its share price has gone so mental. What's it? If you bought it a few years ago, you're getting about 10 times your money or something now, aren't you? And they've been around forever. And I used to cover them a lot when I was at Hexus because they do graphics cards and stuff. That's what's in my PC at home. And so they've gone, all right, NVIDIA, you can sell GPUs or specific cards for high performance computing into China, but they've got to be shit versions of what we can get here.
I mean, they've figured that that's the way they can hurt China.
Exactly.
And I don't see one of the reasons I have a bit of an issue with some of that research is that there's not an obvious way that China can do the reverse. There's not a thing that it can restrict the Americans' access to that will hurt their technological capability.
Well,
you don't see a lot of people at the moment.
Well, there's the advanced materials for starters.
There's the raw materials.
Rare earth
and they have done that, haven't they? They have tried to introduce some legislation where they say they will clamp down on silicon exports. I mean, the raw materials, silicon and other stuff.
Some of those obscure
gallium nitride, whatever it might be.
Cable
but I mean, there's the raw materials, but in terms of the actual, what you do with them and the technologies, there's not a lot that I can see that where they can say we're going to shut off access. The most obvious,
agreed.
The most obvious.
That's not the point that's being made here.
No, I know. I'm just sort of saying that's one of the reasons I find it hard to. Nobody's looking at Microsoft and Amazon and Google and Elon Musk's various companies and going, these guys are not really up to snuff when it comes to AI these days, are they? And quite the opposite. And as a market where it's this is the attraction of Silicon Valley, isn't it? You've got some of the best universities in the world. People are from everywhere. You can get the Chinese to go and work there if you want. You can lure them with money.
Indeed.
And, there's not an equivalent to me, and I'm an outsider. I appreciate that. I don't spend a lot of time in China, but it's harder to see in that kind of nearly totalitarian system that there's an obvious equivalent. I think one of the things that when The Economist writes about China and business there and technology in the last few years under the sort of Xi Jinping era, that there's a concern it's actually going backwards a little bit in some regards because it's not the way to. That's not where innovation comes from. Is to try and have too much state control and.
And Xi Jinping has definitely hobbled. They're getting attacked from both fronts, the Chinese tech sector, from the US and internally.
So I'm afraid I don't really believe a lot of that research that's come out.
Okay, well, this was from nearly a year ago.
I have an issue with it.
But I don't want to be too sidetracked, and that's fine. You're Your objection's noted.
Yeah. The one area, by the way, where they were always supposed to be ahead, that was really relevant to what we talk about, was massive MIMO.
Right.
You know, and 5G, you know, there's this long thing about, you know, you go and talk to the telecom operators themselves even, and they don't want to go on record a lot of the time when they say it, but yeah, Huawei's better than Ericsson and Nokia. And I think that was always something that was acknowledged for a long time, that they had better RAN equipment.
Well, and in defence of this thing from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute from last March, you know, they do say, and this is the reason that both our titles covered it, that they're kicking ass in 5G and 6G.
Yeah.
Generally.
Yeah.
But anyway, this isn't. That's not the main point. So nothing you've said I disagree with, but I don't want to be too sidetracked for too long. The point is, America said to NVIDIA, you can only sell shit versions of your like AI
GPUs.
Yeah, AI GPUs to China. Initially, China was like, all right, we'll just buy more of them and just sort of put them in a pile.
Yeah.
But now, according to this story, and it's just one little bit of journalism, so by all means take this with a pinch of salt as well. They're now just thinking, nah, fuck it, it's not worth it anymore. And according to this story, Huawei's filling the void. And Huawei's now getting good at making AI chips itself. And so this is part of, again, take it with a pinch of salt. But people who aren't watching, well, actually, it wouldn't have gone to him. Ian just gave me a skeptical wrinkle of the nose. And I just think it's interesting. So hypothetically, again, before you refute it, if we take it at face value, and China is increasingly looking to become self-reliant on silicon, which would make sense.
Yeah, I can see them trying to do that.
And SMIC, apparently, which is their main fab, is apparently pretty capable at 7 nanometers, which is generations.
Pretty capable. It's made one that it's put in a chip that it's shown to the world. But
no. I think there's a lot more SMIC 7 nanometer, not 5 or 3. 7.
Yeah, but even with 7, if you're using the equipment they've got, there's no way they've got the equipment that you need to do 7 nanometer at scale.
Are we still looking at EUV and all that?
You need EUV equipment to do 7 nanometer.
Okay,
if you don't have EUV equipment and you're using DUV equipment, you need to do double patterning, which doesn't produce good yields.
Fair enough.
And that's the concern.
And is EUV that Dutch firm?
So this was actually also in the news related to your story. There's stories about a clampdown on ASML, which is the Dutch firm that makes these lithography machines that are basically used to imprint
that you need for these really
circuit
advanced
patterns onto the silicon wafers, and you need the equipment from ASML to do the very most advanced stuff, which is the latest generation is EUV, slightly older one is DUV. So you can do these really small transistor chips with DUV equipment, but it's a bit of a compromise. It's like a workaround that's not ideal. And that's the concern about what SMIC's done, is that it's done it. Fair enough. Is it going to be able to produce them at scale and do it in a way that you don't sort of run up losses and this kind of thing?
Well, but the losses one's interesting, because if this is all underwritten by the Chinese state...
maybe they can get away with it then. But
I take your point.
They're definitely going to have a problem going down below that sort of node, you know, to 3, 2, 1, whatever it is. I mean, we're getting now to the stage where nanometers need replacing with something else.
Yeah, and you get these bizarre things of electron leakage, because they flip between the atoms at that fucking size.
Yeah, I mean the other point about them getting chips from Huawei, I don't believe it, because it seems to me that Huawei can do anything. You know, it's like every time there's a story about something, Huawei can do that. You know, I mean, I know they're a big company.
And for all we know, it's Huawei that leaked this story to the Wall Street Journal.
They're a massive company, right? And they spend a huge amount on R&D. It's like 20 billion or whatever a year. It's clearly a lot more than the Nordic companies are spending. But, you know, they're not a chip maker. They are, what do they do? What have they historically done? They've made network equipment and they've made smartphones. And they've done some enterprise stuff.
And even smartphones, so that's a relatively recent thing. Their core is networking.
NVIDIA's a company that's been doing GPUs for a long, long time, has built up a huge amount of expertise in that area. And they're saying all of a sudden Huawei can just pluck a GPU out of its arse. You know, I'm afraid I just don't believe it.
It's called the Ascend. No, fair enough. I think you're right to be skeptical. It's called the Ascend 910B. And an interesting thing about that is the Ascend 910. I've linked to that because I covered it. That's still where is it?
I'll concede they've got a GPU, but there's no fucking way it's as good as NVIDIA's GPUs. So if they're saying that we've got this as a replacement for NVIDIA, I don't believe it, because there's a reason NVIDIA has...
What they're saying is, just to fine tune what they're saying, is they're saying that this is better than the shit version of NVIDIA.
Right, so it's somewhere between the shit version and the good version of NVIDIA.
That's what this story is alleging. But yes, I mean, you're totally entitled to still be skeptical about that. By the way, the predecessor, this is called the Ascend 910B. The Ascend 910 was launched at an event I think you and I might have both been at in 2019. Might be that thing we went on, like Park Lane. There was a Huawei thing there. And Sunggee's Eric Xu was up there doing the thing and showing the chip and going, and it says Ascend 910.
Rotating.
Right.
Yeah, he's there rotating. He's
rotated out at the moment. Somebody else.
On the times he was facing the audience, he said the Ascend 910 meet the world's most powerful AI processor, which was fairly fucking spurious claim at the time.
Yeah.
So now we're on to the 910B, which doesn't feel like much of progress in 4 years, but there we go. So that's the claim. Anyway, but the flip side, the only thing I want to finish off on that, and if you've got any last thoughts, feel free. If we take it all at face value, and there are many reasons not to, but if we take it all at face value, that Huawei, and if we treat Huawei as a proxy of the Chinese state, which it always insists it's not, sorry Huawei, but if we do, hypothetically, then this story is someone saying the Chinese state is getting better and better at being self-reliant in chips, at such that if we're not going to buy any old crap you send us. We've got some stuff that's like not quite as good, but it's not terrible. And the flip, and the point of it for me, if it's true, is just how self-harming this US stuff can still be. Like I said, I still question the moral pretext of them just throwing their weight around and going, no, you can't have stuff because then you might get good at it. We want to be the only people who are good at it.
Yeah.
But also,
I think
there's just the self-harm. There's the harm to NVIDIA itself, and then there's the extra drive and motivation it's giving to China to get better at all the stuff that it's starving it of.
Yeah, I mean, the geopolitical point, the people on the other side would say we don't want to give stuff to China that they could use to make advanced weapons that they then use to attack us. Yeah. That's probably what they'd say.
Well, it's all right for America to have those advanced weapons.
Well, yeah, because they're not going to attack themselves.
No, but they might attack someone else. I'm talking about the pure moral. I know, but strategically you're right, but morally I still stand by my point. But it's like
two kids in the playground, squaring up to each other, and one wants to be bigger than the other one, and he wants to make sure that the other one doesn't have access to the food and the weight equipment that he has. Of course, it's like
it's basic power play.
Basic power play. But I mean, the Huawei thing is. The trouble I have with Huawei really these days is, that period they went through a few years ago when everybody was talking about restrictions and the government in the UK, where we are, was weighing what to do. And they kind of went through a phase when they became quite transparent, I felt then, in their dealings with the press and with analysts. And you often found yourself on calls with executives and with them trying to explain what they were doing and, talking about their stance. And they've sort of gone... I mean, maybe you could say you can't blame them because of what's happened to them in the West, but they've become the company they were almost back in the sort of noughties, like very, very closed, very hard to get any information out of at all. It's very rare to ever be offered a meeting with an executive these days. You usually just find yourself dealing with the PR guys. And
they're still good.
No criticism of the PR guys, by the way. They're still good at taking us to
cocktail bars.
They're still good at doing that. But if you actually try and get something substantive out of them...
Oh, yeah, I agree.
And this is why we can't believe... And the problem with that is... You can't believe anything they say, because a Nokia, you could get on I was on a call with the CEO of Nokia not that long ago where they're facing up to some of the problems they've got. They have to do that as a scrutinised Western company under regulations. They have to sort of say, this is an area we struggled in the part we're doing this. This is the reason for the AT&T. They have to give their rationale for it. Huawei can just say anything it wants, and you never get access to detailed audited accounts where you can actually see what's going on. Then they're not sort of... So they don't help their case that they're somehow a little bit like a Western company, and they're not actually.
I completely agree with that. I think that's always been the case. I mean, I think I've always, as a Western journalist, I think I've been one of the ones who's given Huawei the benefit of doubt more and criticised the lack of smoking gun evidence against them for a lot of the allegations made against them. But on the flip side, I completely agree. They don't make the job of those of us like me who are trying to be completely balanced and not tribal and parochial. They don't make our job any easier by not giving us any fucking ammo to work with.
Yeah.
So, so we don't know.
I mean, one thing I'm keen to know about them at the moment is that, we're just talking about virtual RAN and all this stuff, and there's always been this thing about where do they stand when it comes to Open RAN. The big argument why they shouldn't be necessarily interested in Open RAN is it was very much pitched as a alternative to Huawei. But apparently some of the Chinese operators like the idea of it. They like some of the other stuff that you get. If you're talking about virtual RAN as well, some of the other capabilities that you get from doing that, this sort of putting things on general purpose equipment and being able to share resources. But you go to them and say, what's your stance on this? And you don't really get anything from them.
Yeah.
You don't get any information at all.
No, so I don't know how much I don't know how much of it's cultural. I don't want to overgeneralize about culture from a country that's on the other side of the world, but that East Asia does seem to be more closed.
Yeah.
They don't seem to understand how journalists like us work, where we'll just say what the fuck we want.
Yeah.
I think they probably have a more transactional relationship with their journalists over there. So yeah, it's hard, but I still think, back to the core story here, if that Wall Street Journal story is at least half true, then I come back to my central point about US foreign policy, which is leaving aside the morality, leaving aside the understandable strategic reason. Is it actually self-harming? Is it actually producing a strategic win, or are they just hobbling national champions like Nvidia, while at the same time China is already pretty fucking good at some bits of AI.
Yeah.
And they're just encouraging them to become even more self-reliant anyway.
Yeah, it's like a short-term game, really, isn't it? I agree with that, and I think that's a concern because the thing that they have that the West perhaps doesn't have is this enormous domestic market to serve. And, at one point, 1.4 billion people. For a start, you're going to produce a few geniuses in a country that big. You're going to have the capability of doing stuff.
And their student, I mean, they have so many more students.
Yeah. You're going to have a few Einsteins in the population just because it's so big as a percentage of the world's population. And you've also got this, I mean, this is one of the reasons Huawei's continued to do quite well. I think it came out with its New Year's statement quite recently.
Yeah, it's doing all right.
We kind of, I wrote about it actually it was before New Year. I remember it coming out sort of 27th.
So Andrew wrote about it while I was on the January 2nd. Look, it's proof that he was working while I was still slacking off. Huawei says it's, quote, back on track.
So it's 7% up, I think, in sales, I think was something like that, the headline figure. Probably largely driven by devices, the speculation was, and there's some of the hints in the statement. But people are always like, even when they were at their lowest, after all these initial sanctions have been introduced, people were always like, how are they still doing quite well, when we've clobbered them so much? And so they've got a big market at home that they can serve.
And they've got something like 2/3 of all the
base stations or something in the world. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
In China,
I know.
So they've got a ridiculous amount there. But, I mean, Chinese operators are among the most advanced. So they don't just buy any old crap.
Yeah.
Even if it's Xi Jinping saying you better buy it or else. I don't think he can, it's still got to be there on merit.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, so that's that. We another one that we were just alluding to, another story you covered, which stems, we were just talking about this at length with Pierre before we started recording. There's a big drama in the UK around our post office, which is the sort of semi-nationalised, formerly totally nationalised. I don't know to what extent it's still
government owned.
Still government owned, okay.
Yeah.
Sort of postal service, like the, I don't know, UPS or whatever. Basically, about 20 years ago, they procured a bunch of software for their back office, for their systems from Fujitsu. And cut a long story short, and I'll again defer to you, Ian, on my new show of this, because you've covered it and you've watched the dramatisation which prompted all this, which I haven't. But cut a long story short, this software started flagging up missing money. And they ended up prosecuting loads of their own post office employees for nicking it, without stopping to think, how come 700 people suddenly went on the nick at the same time? And it turns out they never nicked anything. And so it's a massive miscarriage of justice. And it has massive sort of IT implications. So you wrote a story you published today called The UK Post Office Scandal Hold Lessons for Telecoms. So what was that all about?
Well, yeah, I mean, the story itself, which you summed up really well, but the dramatisation, by the way, makes you really angry. So I think this is why
such an injustice.
This is why such a long time after all this happened, and it started. I think the series itself starts in 2003 and focuses on the first few people who were sort of caught up in this horror show, really. And it's all quite sinister. I mean, they were phoning up the helpline. It's called Horizon, the system, the software system. They were phoning up the helpline like it's flagging up losses and being told you're the only person who's got problems with it. Nobody else has.
God, so just the lies were endemic.
The lies were endemic. And this is the thing that makes you think that the staff within the post office, and Paula Venables, by the way, was the CEO for a long period between 2012 and 2019. So actually, after a lot of the initial reporting and allegations and prosecutions had gone ahead, but carried on pursuing them right up till the time when she sort of left. And it's
actually, just quickly, but in that reporting was done by a title called Computer Weekly, which is part of this Tech Target that I just alluded to at the start of the pod.
Yeah.
So, like, fair play. That is like proper reporting.
So she's actually in the series,
right?
Or a depiction of her.
Because it was just one young reporter.
It was one young reporter. She's called Rebecca Thompson. I think she's a freelancer now, but she worked for Computer Weekly.
See if we can snap her up.
Yeah, well, the editor at the time, apparently,
she's probably expensive now.
She was 26, so I think like first job almost.
Right.
And Alan Bates, who's one of the postmasters who was affected, but he's a very prominent figure. He was played by Toby Jones.
He's the prominent figure in this dramatisation.
Yeah, and he basically led the campaign to get justice for postmasters. So he got them all together. They used to have little meetings in a village hall, and
like I think
it was.
Thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was. The nice thing about the series is it's that kind of we're not alone. Even if
because they must have felt so isolated.
They must have felt so isolated. When you realise there's other people in the same situation some of them have gone to jail, they'd lost their homes.
That incredible thing. I mean, just a slight quick tangent. I was reading a story about a bloke who just got out of prison because he'd been found innocent 50 years after he was put away.
That. Yeah.
I mean, that feeling of being punished for something you know for a fact you didn't do must really wreck your head.
It must be horrible. Yeah, it must be horrible. And at the time they were, they had
Shawshank Redemption.
It is. But some of the postmasters were sort of encouraged to plead, even by their own sort of legal advisors, to plead guilty because they'd
take a plea.
Take a deal basically, and it'll be better off for you. And so they did, even though they knew they'd done nothing wrong. I mean, it's really scary. But the relevance for telecom, I think, is. It is a bit tangential. I mean, it's a Quiet Friday. I don't know if I'd have written it if it hadn't been a Quiet Friday, but I think there's two things. First of all, the company that sold the software, Fujitsu, which is under a huge amount of scrutiny at the moment, has been, it's not just the post office, by the way. They've been very, very much in with the UK and public sector contracts for a long time. I think this Horizon system underpins a lot of other things, or was supposed to underpin a lot of other things.
There's a big public sector procurement scandal.
And the interesting thing for me is the reputational damage on Fujitsu, because I think a lot of people in the UK haven't paid much attention to this until the dramatisation. And I think even now, like Phil, my boss, and some others will probably read that headline and go, what's going on?
Yeah.
But it is becoming known outside the UK now. It's been the top story in the BBC.
Well, my mate on like a chat group was just lamenting how it's just dominated the headlines the whole week in the UK.
So I looked at some of the Japanese press today. It's now, Fujitsu under scrutiny in the UK over what's happened. I think
it's made it over there.
Paul Rainford had a look at the share price has gone down as a consequence of this sort of drama. So it's quite stunning, really. But for a company that plays a big role or wants to play a big role in telco, as well as doing sort of IT software, Fujitsu, remember, is one of these 3 companies from Asia that gets very much associated with the whole, 3 or 4, with the whole Open RAN thing.
Yeah.
So, and the big deal that they were involved in recently, which we both wrote about a fair bit, I think, was the AT&T and Ericsson deal in the US, where they're the only other company, I think, that was named on the sort of RAN side.
Right, yeah. That was
that's going to be providing equipment. Now, that's hardware in that case, but they do have their software that they want to sell in this market as well. I can't see this being a particularly good thing for them, reputationally, when they're trying to push into some of these other markets. And it could hurt them financially as well. I mean, there's talk of them being forced to be involved in the kind of compensation schemes. They could potentially lose government contracts they've got. Anybody else outside the UK reading about this in a public sector role is not going to be thinking very positively about them.
The compensation potentially due for someone who's not just been sacked for something they didn't do, but been put away. Some people top themselves, I think.
Yeah. 4 people. It shows one of the guys in the drama series like jumping in front of the bus.
It's a fucking big
basically.
deal. And then the mental health damage to those who who managed to hold it together enough not to commit suicide. I mean, there was another thing, a complete tangent, but something that interested me. Because I listened to a podcast that is run by Toby Young, who runs a thing called the Free Speech Union. And they often represent people who have been sacked for free speech related things. And this one guy, I won't get into minutiae because it's a bit sort of delicate subject, but this one guy was in some kind of racial awareness training, and he said something that was considered out of order, innocently, but he's in that very delicate sort of social, ethical, corporate minefield of race.
Yep.
And so he said the wrong thing. You can imagine what it might have been.
Yeah.
But to ask a question rather than just be an obnoxious racist prick. And then he got sacked by Lloyd's, and Free Speech Union got lawyers to represent him, and he's getting paid off to a tune of about $800K.
Right.
So that's one geezer who got sacked from Lloyd's just for some trumped up charge. Well, I mean, if Fujitsu has got to pay up these people off to about $1 million a head, that's some serious money.
Well, a lot of them haven't received compensation yet.
Yeah.
Fujitsu doesn't come well out of the ITV drama. I mean, there's allegations that it's, sort of complicit in a cover-up by the post office, really. That, there's a scene in the drama, actually, where one of the postmasters, as they're called, who was a union representative, actually went to visit Fujitsu's offices and was told by staff there that they can get into the system even when postmasters are in it and make changes, which apparently the message from the post office is nobody can get in.
The only person that
this
can do
really
it is
undermined the case of the post office.
Right.
But when he sort of told the investigators about this and they went back to Fujitsu denied that meeting had ever happened, that he'd ever been on their premises at all.
Lying.
So it's like the other thing, I mean, the sort of slightly sort of bigger picture sort of point of the story was, I just think it's stunning that, in a world where we're kind of adopting technology and software more and more.
Yeah.
You remember, I think I started off with this analogy, actually. There's this TV series called Little Britain, where they had this scene, this sketch, Computer Says No sketch, and it's this woman sort of typing away on a keyboard, dealing with various people in different situations, and basically because the computer says no, I can't solve the problem.
So someone goes, "Can I do this?" And they just go tap tap tap. Computer says no.
You're wrong because the computer says so, and I'm right.
There's
and I
no
think
qualitative assessment.
This was like really kind of came across in the ITV drama that this was like almost like computer says no on a big scale. It's like you can't possibly be in the right because the Fujitsu software must be robust.
Well, so this is the really sinister stuff, and I know this is a tangent and little to do with telecoms, but fuck it, it's my podcast. I'll talk about what I want.
Yeah.
Our podcast, sorry, is the possibility that they actually knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
And so decided to stitch these people up to cover their ass. Now, if that turns out to be provable, the liability implications are almost limitless.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing that worries me more almost than the post office thing is the wider societal response to it. So apparently a lot of these postmasters were really kind of vilified in their communities.
Well, people are very happy to just take things at face value.
It was almost like they bought the same thing. People have a really weird approach to technology. If a self-driving car hits someone, even though there's thousands of accidents a year with people actually driving and being responsible, they'll immediately condemn technology and they'll worry about job losses, but they can't possibly sort of rationalise that a computer would be wrong about something. And there seemed to be this view that the computer must be right. Even the criminal justice system seemed to sort of just buy into this argument from the post office that the software is robust. And yet there was no evidence put forward that any real money actually went missing. There was no evidence that these people...
Paper money,
there was no evidence at all.
Yeah.
So there was just this trust of the software over as you mentioned yourself, how ridiculous, 700 postmasters. I don't know what that is as a percentage of the postmasters across the country.
But a lot of them suddenly...
It's a fairly disproportionate number of embezzlers in one organisation.
Who've presumably been fucking spotless. Because presumably one of the things you get, if you work in a post office, you're handling loads of wedge and all that.
But the telecom side of it, I just think that it's a lesson not just for telecom, it's any organisation, but I think we have to be quite careful. We've been at events recently where executives have been talking up this notion of extreme automation, and that you can replace people in jobs and, some of these mundane and very skilled actually, but mundane and humdrum tasks can be done by machines, and let's take away that layer of staff, and things can't really go wrong. There's a sort of assumption that people are the problem. They make the mistakes and the software is reliable.
I totally get what you're saying. It's awful. It's so dystopian.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's dystopian. It's anti-human. And then on top of it, it discounts the fact that any machine has to have been made by a human and programmed by a human.
Yeah.
So to assume flawlessness on the part of a machine, it's not like it's just been beamed down by some celestial being.
Yeah.
Who may well be flawed. So yeah, all of that is bollocks. And there's also, you're talking about, the journalists, with the exception of this Rebecca from Computer Weekly, and then the exception of these documentary makers at ITV, and I'm sure other people have been on it.
Panorama did something.
Panorama, I think I heard Private Eye been on it a fair bit,
had,
but who fucking reads Private Eye?
That's the problem.
But on the whole, the media collective has failed on this one until this thing came out.
Yeah.
And it's an indication of the power of it, because now Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, is having to drop everything and just bang on about the post office the whole time.
It's
amazing how powerful
that or bombing Houthis. Those are the only two things he's on his mind at the moment.
Bombing Houthis, yeah. There was a thing, apparently Russia's condemned us for bombing the Houthis. I was thinking, I'll take that from most countries.
The Houthis said there will be retaliation.
Yeah, there'll be consequences.
But they're already retaliating, aren't they? They started retaliating. That's why we retaliate.
Get their retaliation in first. But back to this thing, there is just this, and I don't blame people. I have this with my mates sometimes, because I'm the only one who's a journalist out of my mates, and I just naturally have not just a more skeptical view, but it's instinctive for me whenever I see something to just do a quick bit of Googling, like I do every time I write a story, and just get under the skin of it and see what's verifiable and what isn't, what's legit and what's sketchy. And most people don't have that, and that's fine. I'm not putting myself on a pedestal, because that's my day job. But things like, I listen to a lot of podcasts where things like stuff to do with the pandemic comes up, and criticisms of lockdown policy, criticisms of the biggest one for me is criticism of these mRNA vaccines. Not that I think they were completely ineffective, but the fact that we were deeply discouraged from being at all skeptical about these things that are turned around in 9 months, whereas a normal vaccine takes about 10 years to produce, and using a novel technology such that there's not really a vaccine. A vaccine's normally a denatured version of the pathogen.
Isn't there something recently about them permanently altering your DNA?
Yeah, you might have seen it. I put it on Facebook.
Maybe it was from your thing.
There's a thing. This is a complete tangent, but fuck it. So we all know about HIV that gives you AIDS. Well, that's called a retrovirus. So viruses all use, their genetic material is RNA, whereas our genetic material is DNA. But as you can probably gather, they're related. In fact, the only thing that's different is deoxy. So DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, RNA is ribonucleic acid. So they're very similar things. And in our body, we use DNA to store all our genes, but then we use a thing called messenger RNA to get a message from those genes into your cell to say, make this protein. So there's like a simple production line where DNA goes, right, we've got to make this protein. Here's some messenger RNA. It goes to the protein factory called a ribosome, and then that makes the protein. And then that's what they did with these mRNA vaccines. They introduced this mRNA into your cells to tell it to make these spike proteins. So it was a way of introducing one part of the pathogen, considered the critical part, called the spike protein, into your body. So it's a novel way of getting your immune system to be alert to this pathogen. But the problem is, you got things like HIV, and they use an enzyme called reverse transcriptase, where they can actually. So transcription is the process of making mRNA out of DNA. So making that little copy, that little mobile copy. But you can do reverse transcription, where RNA gets made back into DNA and then gets embedded into your genome. And that's what HIV does. That's why AIDS is so fucking hard to get rid of.
Right.
Because its genetic material hides inside your own DNA. So how can you catch that?
Yeah.
It's perfect. And I read this one study, and this is a proper peer-reviewed thing, that says that apparently this mRNA vaccine, this Pfizer Moderna stuff, can be reverse transcribed and stuck into your DNA.
Well, that's the one.
They didn't tell us that.
Brilliant. God, isn't nature complicated?
It is
more complicated than a base station.
Yes. So, but anyway, the purpose, the reason we went off on that tangent is that was another example of stuff that we're basically told to take it at face value. And if you go, hold on a sec, what's going on here? Then people go, no, you're vaccine denier and all these sorts of terms.
Yeah.
And then loads of people, it could be, so you say you took the mRNA, did you?
I took the
AstraZeneca.
I took both. I think they went back the third
They were
time.
just chucking you like something out of Hellraiser.
It was AstraZeneca for the first two.
Yeah.
And then there was the booster, wasn't there? And that was the Pfizer one.
So I only did the first two. I never had a booster.
You never went for a booster.
No,
so you've escaped that mutation that'll make me sprout a third
and it's probably, it's probably tiny.
Heads,
and if you can get into your DNA, presumably you can exit your DNA?
Well, so that's the worry. The real purpose of this, if it gets into your DNA, that means it starts expressing itself permanently. So, we got things like long COVID. They think one possible reason for that is that you've got this spike protein, this pathogen, being produced over a long period of time, which is why you get long COVID. So normally when you get a bug, you get like flu, you feel like shit for a week, but then it goes away because your immune system's dealt with it. Imagine if flu was able to recombine into your own genome and produce flu filth the whole time. You'd have flu permanently. So, all of this, people who understand biochemistry and virology and molecular biology better than I do could look into it.
Do you hear the Bill Gates updates in your thoughts?
Well, so this is the point. Newsletter. This is the point. You're allowed to be like one of these people that people like Joe Rogan had on that was skeptical. And that's the reason I come back to it with that post office thing. And I'll end it there and go on to one final thing before we call it a day. Is that the thing that links all these together is something comes up, and I think there's a sort of level of credibility in most people after which they file it as conspiracy theory. And so let's say with the post office thing, something comes up, and let's say you were this Rebecca in 2009 going, hold on, I think 700 people are being prosecuted by the state because the state and their contractor want to cover up a massive fuck up. People go, "Oh, calm down. That's not going to happen." I'm sure what's a more plausible explanation is that they all went nicking at the same time.
Yeah.
And this happens with all kinds of other things, especially during the lockdown. All these things just become so big that people just go, "No, it can't be that." Or it's like climate. If you dare be skeptical about, like we're getting all these headlines about last year was the hottest year ever.
Yeah.
And if you're skeptical about how that's measured or what the implications of it are or what we should do about it, people are like, oh, denier this and conspiracy theorists that and swivel-headed tinfoil hat wearing nut
You're not
job.
allowed to call it global warming anymore because that doesn't suit the narrative.
Right,
it's
climate
27
change.
degrees in Iran at the moment.
So anyway, so that's the point. And I think, and a lot of times people are conspiracy theorists and they are just making up random shit. But it's ultimately what my point is that censorship should be avoided. I think all stuff should be out there and it should all be stress tested.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be some stuff where there's the acceptable official narrative and everything else is just nut jobs. Anyway, so the final thing I want to chat about, and I'll keep it short and sweet, so the thing I wrote today, where the headline was, Google steals a march on rivals and regulators by axing data transfer fees. And so Google just announced that it is getting rid of fees that it charges people to transfer their data if they want to move from its public cloud to one of its competitors, which would typically be AWS or Microsoft Azure. And I sort of thought, well, good for them. Fucking about time too. Because, a big criticism that we've said loads of times on this pod about the public cloud is they've got an oligopoly of the three of them. If you look at market share, the next biggest player is Alibaba, which is probably almost entirely within China, and that's sub 5% of the global stuff. IBM's been in decline. They're like about 3% globally.
What can I ask, because you're looking at that synergy data, I guess.
Yeah.
But what's the trend lines for the big three?
So trend lines for big three is AWS flat,
right,
holding its own at about 33%. Microsoft's steady rise from, so the start of this chart is Q4 2018 to Q3 2023. So it's, let's say, 5 years. Microsoft's gone from 15% at the start to about 23% now. So they're the big gainers. Google's done all right. They've gone from about 7% to about 12% now.
Okay.
Globally.
But they've been taking share not from Amazon then, clearly.
They've been taking share from IBM's been a big loser. IBM was level with Google at the start and now it's down at about 3%.
Which is interesting because it kind of nips in the bud that argument that some people come up with that there's actually is more competition than we think in the public cloud.
Well,
it's clearly becoming a bigger deal for the big three.
Well, so the only thing I'll say, so the big three are very dominant as individual players. Like I said, the only other person that's on this chart that's named is Alibaba, and they're at 4%, and that'll be almost entirely Chinese.
Yeah.
But then there's others. So the aggregate
a
of
massive
the long tail.
mishmash.
Yeah, the aggregate of the long tail is at about 27%. So there is competition, but it's completely distributed.
Yeah.
The big three are definitely the big three in terms of single suppliers.
Well, that'd be people like those. That mishmash will be all sorts of people. You know, the likes of Deutsche Telekom even doing
whoever.
doing what it says is public
Oracle,
cloud stuff
all sorts.
in Germany, and
and so they go and so the biggest worry, and one we've spoken about loads of times, probably laboured the point with these big public cloud providers is, it's an oligopoly, and furthermore, an oligopoly where when you go for one, it's very hard to leave them.
Yeah.
Because not only do you get reliant on their services, and there's the convenience and the familiarity and all that sort of thing, but then there's the massive cost of moving from one to the other. They deliberately make it hard to move from one to the other. There's certain proprietary shit in each one, which presumably makes it hard as well. But then there's the allegation that Google chucks at Microsoft, that Microsoft also makes it hard if you're using some of its other software like Office.
yeah.
That it kind of attaches strings to that and going, you better use our cloud stuff. I stress I'm not making this allegation, Microsoft's lawyers. I'm just regurgitating.
Well, I think that did come up in a UK government report.
Yeah. So that comes up in this story.
Yeah.
And anyway, so they've come up with this thing where they're axing. So this CMA thing that you were just referring to, I'll quickly touch on that because it's relevant. So the CMA launched a probe. We covered this back in October last year, and the three biggest areas, and it was on the back of Ofcom flagging up some areas of concern. And the big areas of concern they had was egress fees, which is basically what I'm talking about now, these data fees for moving from one thing to another, which presumably there's some cost associated, but I bet there's
I think
a lot of piss-taking going on there.
Yeah, they ramp it up, to make things as difficult for you as possible.
And then there's discounts. So that's to do with a lot of antitrust stuff that's happened in Europe over the years, like Intel versus AMD and that sort of thing, where they make it impossible for you to move because of the discounting system.
Yeah.
And then there's technical barriers to switching. So that's actually just putting technical obstacles there. Those are the three things that Ofcom flagged up.
I think some of them are unintentional, in fairness to the players.
Yeah.
You might have a system where there's just not an equivalent on the Microsoft
But then you
side.
could still argue, if you're a regulator, that you should go and fucking find one.
Yeah.
Just go out of your way to make it easier.
Yeah, you could.
But yes, your point is they haven't necessarily set it up in a
technology at cost, aren't you? Then, in a sense, you
But regulators can do that.
They can.
But your point is they not all these obstacles are necessarily set up by some moustache twirling supervillain.
No.
And that's fine. I'll take that. And so they got rid of it. So superficially, you think good for Google Cloud, but then I sort of thought, well, as far as I'm concerned, no company ever does anything out of kindness of their heart. But of course, the blog they do. They have to spin it that way. They have to frame it that way. So this was Amit Zaveri, who's head of platform at Google Cloud. He blogged and he went, at Google Cloud, we work to support a thriving cloud ecosystem that is open, secure, and interoperable. That's all they care about.
Yeah.
Starting today, Google Cloud customers who wish to stop using Google Cloud and migrate their data to another cloud provider and or on-premise can take advantage of free network data transfer to migrate their data. So good for you, Google, and definitely good for them. But what's their ulterior motive? Because there's got to be one. And then he starts talking about restrictive and unfair licensing practices. And he says certain legacy providers, and I think this is obviously referring to Microsoft, certain legacy providers leverage their on-premises software monopolies.
I hate that word.
I know. Use.
Yeah, I know.
Or take advantage of.
Yes.
Yeah. I know. It's very annoying. I mean, I don't mind leverage as like a technical term for debt.
Leverage
for debt,
yeah.
or using a lever to open something up, like a crowbar.
Yeah.
But no, not leverage as a verb. I don't like it at all.
It often gets used for use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Use, or in this case, exploit.
Yeah, the people think there's something wrong with the word use because it's too simple.
Well, I mean, there's so much rich language. They could have use, utilize, exploit, take advantage of.
I don't like utilize either.
No, that's basically a wanky way of saying use, isn't it? Okay, fair enough. I'll give you that. But I'm just saying that there's lots of different words that you could leverage. So anyway, certain legacy providers use their on-premises software monopolies to create cloud monopolies, using restrictive licensing practices that lock in customers and warp competition, he said. And they've got some form on this. They've had a moan about Microsoft in the past. And so basically what I think Google's done here is I actually think this move, although it's global, I think it's actually primarily driven by this UK CMA thing, because they're looking into this. And at the same time, Google's only got about, I think, a 5 to 10% share in the UK. So they've got an even shitter share here. So they're very much a challenger.
Yeah.
So they've got all the incentive to chuck dirt at the big two. And they seem to be focusing almost entirely on Microsoft. Presumably they've got some dirt on AWS.
You see this in markets where there's a small player and a big player that's being challenged by that small player. They're always more open. They always scrap fees. They always do discounts.
Exactly. It's just like a fourth operator.
It's free in the UK, basically. It's their kind of thing.
No, it's exactly that playbook. And then I couldn't resist. I had a paragraph where I said, and Google should know a monopolist when it sees one. A jury recently concluded Google operates an App Store monopoly, while a European court this week insisted Google can't wriggle out of a massive fine imposed on it for favouring its own shopping price comparison service in Google Search. The EU is also considering splitting up Google's advertising operations, and then there are various big tech probes underway, most aggressive in the UK. So Google knows all about monopolies, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Yep. Just because it's got a vested interest, and just because it annoyingly chooses to spin it as some act of philanthropy rather than what it was obviously always going to be, which is in its business interest to do it. And so I concluded by saying, nonetheless, it seems like a fairly canny move by Google. The publicity around its act of largesse, which I meant sarcastically, will definitely put pressure on Microsoft and AWS to follow suit, as well as giving the CMA more ammunition for its probe, and the probe is going to be primarily focused on Microsoft and AWS because they dominate. They've got something like 80% of the market.
Yeah.
And I said, and just because you're self-interested doesn't mean you're wrong. So fair enough. But I just thought that was an interesting one to end on. Google's doing the right thing. It's doing it for self-interested reasons. But I really hope that this sort of thing does lead to a lot of scrutiny, because it isn't an oligopoly. And I'm not saying Amazon, AWS and Microsoft are playing dirty, but they've got a hell of a lot of power.
Yeah.
And I've got a feeling, anecdotally from talking to people, we've got that famous one we always quote from Scott Petty at Vodafone saying it's a pain in the arse to move cloud providers.
Yeah.
I think it's in everyone's interest for regulators to step in and make moving from one of the few cloud providers we have on offer to another as easy as possible.
Yeah, totally.
Sorry to interrupt then.
That's right, we're pretty much done anyway.
No, I forgot to do it at the beginning. I just wanted to give the podium from last year, the whole year. So we had, obviously, local, London.
Oh, like most listened to locations?
Cities. Yeah,
cities.
London, then Santa Rosa and Cincinnati.
Cincinnati?
How strange. Santa Rosa?
Where's that? That sounds like a Southern California type of thing.
Santa Rosa is probably in the...
Silicon Valley, is it?
Yeah, I'm guessing.
Or is it somewhere else?
Let's look up.
I don't know that as one of the sort of, they call them cities, but they're really just big towns along the side of
City in California. Yeah.
No, it's north of San Francisco. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Interesting.
Strange. Okay.
Yeah, it's just north. I mean, some of these things, I don't know, Pierre, some of these things could be to do with like data centers and that sort of thing. Like it could be that you're getting, Santa Rosa is where there's a big data center where all the Northern California traffic gets aggregated or something like that.
Another interesting stat is that...
Near the Napa Valley, that is. I'd like to go there.
Yeah. Oh. See our fans.
I've been there. Sonoma as well.
Yeah, Sonoma. Yeah, around the corner.
Yountville. Anyway.
Yeah. Not cheap, though.
No, I bet.
An interesting stat from last year is about 22% of our entire listens came from last year alone. So we're just...
Oh,
wow.
Very good.
So you're saying of all our listeners last year, 22% of them were new?
22% of our whole all-time listens came from last year.
Oh, right, okay.
Were last year.
Of our aggregate.
Yeah, if you look at the number from last year compared to the total number.
And do we have a rough sense of what our total number for 23 was versus 22?
Oh, yeah.
And it's up?
Yeah, massively.
By a decent chunk?
Actually, I can tell you now. Yeah, about 25%.
Wow, 25%.
Actually, wait, no, 20%.
Do you have any stats on individual pods? It's so Dennis O'Brien's, right?
No, actually, Dennis O'Brien is the second one. The first one was Vodafone, BT, and European M&A and AI.
That was just the two of us.
Was it?
No, it was with Andrew. Andrew is
Andrew.
Go on, Andrew.
Maybe it's Andrew's family just like playing it, you know.
He's not Catholic. Cool. All right. Well, I think we're done, aren't we? We're done about 2 hours. So hurrah! We're not going to have a guest next week either, but then we're going to have a lot of guests from there after. And I'm hoping that we'll get Dean on for the pre-Mobile World Congress one. We've still got to chat about whether we're going to do that one at that half term as well. Okay,
so you can poo-poo it.
Exactly. I just think he's a good person to have on.
Like he did last.
Well, I mean, first and foremost because he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd rather have someone on than I don't know, Matt Cranrid or something. Who'd just be going, it's going to be beautiful. So, or however he talks. I don't even know how he talks. Generic Nordic accent. Yes, so that's that. So I'll leave it there. We're going to go to the pub and drink non-alcoholic lager, aren't we?
It's going to be weird.
It's going to be odd. Yeah. But thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.